Hi everyone! I like to give video feedback on your discussion board posts. This helps you learn from everyone's responses because I point out some really key highlights and many of you note these highlights. It also keeps you from having to read through everything one more time. So let me just begin, and these are in no particular order except for the first and the last. And the first is that some of you talked about the importance of relationship. And I think this is something that we all know, we all need to remember every day is so important when dealing with all of our students, but particularly with our emergent bilinguals or English language learners. I like the term emergent bilinguals, but because our program uses English language learners, I will continue to use ELLs or English language learners. One of the things I found in my travels around the world is that a smile and a welcoming attitude goes a long way. And I think in working with our emergent bilinguals or any of our students, the time to build that relationship is time well spent. And that's something that many of you noted. Another thing that a few people pointed out is that it is not necessary to speak the language of the student in order to be a good ESOL or English language learner teacher. You just need to know some of those best practices. So, although I will say that learning a few words in a student's home language is so beneficial, not just for working with the student and establishing relationships, but in working with families too. So I remember one of my first English learners was a little Thai girl, and I made sure to learn the Savadi Ka or Kapkun Ka, Kapkun Kap, to speak with her and with her mother. So those are key things to remember. Also, some of you talked about the importance of family and engaging family. And again, while of course we likely need to use translators, but that smile, that friendly, open attitude, that desire to truly learn something about that family's background and experiences does come across, and you noted this. There was a lot of talk about anchor charts. One of the things that I find for myself in particular is that I feel it's important to engage students in creating anchor charts because they're meaningful then. I also think it's important to be sure to walk over to anchor charts, point to them, and refer to them during many lessons. I've had experiences where students are sitting right next to an anchor chart, and they never bother to use the information on that anchor chart. And so by constantly showing our students that we point them out, especially in that modeling phase, is a good way to encourage our students to use those anchor charts. You talked about word walls, and word walls in all of our subject areas, in all of our grade levels. I think that in high school, using Greek and Latin root word walls is a wonderful idea, and we're going to have a reading on this in a future class modules. For our little kiddos, somebody had asked a great question about sight words and how we might use sight words on word walls, because those maybe aren't so easy to classify into content areas or meaning areas. And they asked the question, well, would we continue to alphabetize those? And I do, personally. I think that that's perfectly acceptable, but one of the ways that I do it, if you can see it in my windy area here down by Helen Pond, is I make sure to cut out around the letters so that this gives our learners more of a visual. And this is important. This visual is important for some of our native English speakers, but it's also important for those students who may use a different alphabet. And so I like doing that. Let me point out one other little language-related question here about different vowel sounds. And some of you noted how the different vowel sounds in English are difficult for our emergent bilinguals. And this is certainly true. We are going to have a whole module on vowel sounds from some of the other languages that are prevalent in our classrooms today. So look forward to that. I always enjoy that module a lot. I did read some of your concerns about specific behaviors in some of our English learners. And this is certainly, I know it's a concern sometimes. We do need to remember that in many cultures, there is more of a collectivist attitude and expectation, whereas in the United States, we have a very individualistic viewpoint. And so many of our cultures, our students are taught that it's not just about them, it's about their relationship to the group, and they are responsible for others in the group. And so that may account for some of the different kinds of behaviors we see. They're not wrong behaviors, they're just different from what our expectations are in this country. And I'm just going to reinforce again that important family connection and the value of a smile and a welcoming attitude. I really enjoyed all the comments about modeling. I'm going to post a very short video of a modeling exercise demonstration I did for a class at one point. And you will notice all of the comprehensible input, those gestures, even body positioning, where I move my body back and forth as I invite students to take a peek into my brain to see what I'm thinking, because it's not just the gestures, it's the body positioning that can help with that comprehensible input, particularly when you're dealing with those metacognitive strategies. And that's because good modeling is so essential. And yes, storyboards are great ways. Thank you for mentioning storyboards. Another component that we might want to consider, even in all subject areas from kindergarten through high school, is the value of the language experience approach, where in a small group or a whole class or one-on-one, you take the words of the student and you write them down, and then you and the student or students read those words together. And that's a very useful and valuable strategy in working with English learners. Let me turn my page of notes here. So I hope you've noticed that in this video, I have really tried to slow down my speech. And this is something that is important when dealing with our emergent bilinguals or English learners. So many times as I've traveled to other countries, I've watched it in Americans who speak with speakers of other languages, and I've watched others in Cambodia or China or whatever speak louder to me. And as we all know, speaking louder doesn't help, but speaking a bit slower does help. And that's something that takes practice for so many of us. But in closing, I do want to say that, as many of you noted, best practices for all of our students are best practices for English learners. There are no secret strategies for English learners or magic ways to do things. They are the best practices that are valuable for all of our students. I always say, just watch a good kindergarten or first grade teacher, and those kinds of things that that teacher does are what we should all be doing from preschool up through the university level and beyond to help our English learners. So watch those gestures, watch those pictures, watch the body positioning, watch the slower language. All of those things are very beneficial. Thank you, and I look forward to reading your next discussion post.